Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Coffee with Jim and James. James, I got to tell you, got a new mug. I'm happy today. We have a great guest, a friend of ours in the industry, and we're going to talk about everything from SMS to top 100 movies to painting. I mean, this is going to be robust. I'm looking
We're
forward
going to cover a lot of ground today. I'll tell you what, over the next couple of days, we're recording with some rock stars, and Jim Francis is one of those. Jim, welcome to the show.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, my friend. Tell us how your day's going right now, Jim. What's Jim's day look like right now?
Yeah, well, it started off pouring down rain, and then the sun has come out. I got a bird's feeder outside my window. It's sort of a beautiful thing. I get to watch all the finches come and go, and so it's been productive. It's been diverse, so it's not been a bad day at all.
And for those that are sharing or watching us on video today, in full disclosure, Jim said I would have a full background, everything hung up. I just moved. So he's not in a prison cell, I swear. He's just decorating.
I'm in a large basement somewhere, actually, in southern Indiana.
Okay, I got to ask a question, Jim. Let me just connect the dots. You were with Vectren Utilities, then thus became CenterPoint in the past. Now, I know you were in Indiana. Did you ever move down to Houston with CenterPoint or not?
Yeah, I've moved a couple different times when I've been acquired a couple different times. So way back, when I first started, I worked at Dayton Power and Light in Ohio, and then Vectren bought them. And so then I moved to Indiana, in the Evansville area, and I lived there for about 15 years. And then once CenterPoint acquired Vectren, I moved down to Houston for about 3 years, and then moved over to EN Engineering and came back to Indiana, where many of my friends were, and my wife ended up getting a job up here. So it's been good to be home, good to be back.
Good thing. I growing up in the Midwest, there are definitely things about the Midwest that I miss. I will say that, but Florida life is pretty good for me. Texas life is good for me too. So I
can't complain. So I'm basically the third wheel on this CenterPoint train. I felt this isn't the first time for me.
No, it's not. But James, when we do these podcasts, I was actually thinking about this today. Who's going to have more fun, you or me? Just because Jim Francis and I have a lot of things in common, and you're just a sponge for the industry. You just want to keep learning more and more about everything. So I don't know. Maybe it's going to be fun for all three of us.
Yeah, we've heard great things about Jim Francis from our friend Steve Allen. He was excited to hear you were coming on today. So why don't we just get right into it, Jimmy?
I am ready if you all are. Jim, a topic that is near and dear to your heart, SMS. Why did you ever get into SMS, consulting, the whole bit, everything that you do with it? Unpack that a little bit, bring us into your world.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm a believer that sort of things happen for a reason, right? And you get people put in your place, you get experiences, you get things that sort of get thrown at you. And when I look back at my career, and it's actually 30 years now, which is kind of crazy to believe that that's the case. I look way back to when I first started, and I was, designing transmission pipelines, and we were looking at records, and, I was building GIS systems and doing system planning. And every time somebody would leave the business, I would get their job. And so I was doing right-of-way management and land services and, all kinds of things that you think, okay, well, why am I getting this? And, just because I'm the new man on the block, maybe that's the why they gave it to you back then. But when you start to fast forward, and you start to, look at all of the experiences and the things that you have. I had an opportunity to manage an operations division, and that was fascinating. It gets you into customer service. It gets you into construction. The engineering side of things. You deal with labor relations. Sort of the litany of all things that kind of come. You have the emergency response activities. You start to understand and appreciate damage prevention. I remember spending a night out on this on Main Street in downtown Dayton after somebody excavated a hole, and then somebody else proceeded to drive their car into the hole, which then broke the gas line and the water line, and then subsequently filled the gas lines up with water, and you're in a low pressure system, so you get those experiences when you have that moment to work in operations, and then you continue to sort of fast forward and all the compliance requirements. When I became a director, I actually got greeted within the first 2 days of my job with a pipeline safety incident, a house explosion. And that's how you meet people like Steve Allen, by the way, is you start to work with the commissions, and you start to work with the pipeline safety divisions, and, you start to see the risks and the things that happen, through the course of all of that. And then you end up with integrity management and OQ and DIMP, and, and ultimately that stuff all starts to build together. And then, you're fortunate enough, and I was fortunate enough to work for a company who they decided they're going to commit to 1173. They put it on my desk and said, go figure it out. And we did, and it worked out really, really well for us. And, you can see the value to the field folks, and you can see the value to the company as a whole. And that's where Steve and I, for example, started building our relationship. So, that's really the background of it. And that's kind of how I got into it. And I remember one of my colleagues, Nancy Conder, and I, we sort of worked together to figure it out. And I kept telling her at some point, we should be consulting around this. There's some things that we have to offer the industry as a whole. And, this would be a good opportunity for us. And, I was given the opportunity to come to E and do exactly that. So thrilled to do it now.
Jim, you mentioned 1173. This is off script, so you don't have to answer it. You can just tell me to move on. But do you have any, I've talked to Steve about it. I've talked to a lot of folks that run in the same circles. How close do you think we are of that being not a recommended practice, but a full-blown something that everybody's going to be adopting?
Yeah, it's funny because it feels like the states are starting to, pick everybody off, although I think maybe it's slowed a little bit. Initially, it seems like several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, there's an incident would occur, something would happen, and it'd become sort of expectation at that level, which I think is fine. It's a good way to do it. I think the states then can start to align with the cost recovery and some of the other challenges that people have, but it's probably the next big incident that happens. But, the whole idea behind it is let's get out in front of this. Let's mitigate risk without, waiting for the incident to occur. And if we can get ourselves a little more accelerated around that, then maybe we don't have to be faced with, it's a requirement and you all have to do it.
Yeah, you bet. So, Jim, you're obviously an SMS champion. When we think about the difference that implementing SMS does for operators, in your opinion, where should operators be spending their time, money, and resources?
Yeah, the two elements of 1173, the two goals and objectives that they highlight are, reduce risk and improve safety culture. And, clearly when you start to execute the process, they go hand in hand. But if you're going to start, you might as well start in that area. And if you start in risk management, as an example, and you start to build out the processes around that, it naturally forces you into other areas. So now you've got to engage your stakeholders. You've got to go out and you talk to your employees, you talk to your contractors, you talk to, the folks that you're working with, the public and others, you talk to your regulators, and you start to gather information from these folks. And you also then start to, create this opportunity for them to be engaged in the solutions. Somebody somewhere has got to mitigate that level of risk. And can you find people that, understand the process? Well, nobody understands it better than the person that executes it every single day. So naturally that's the area that you start to grow in. And then that creates a need for building a learning environment. You've got to be able to, have some way to be able to educate the workforce. And, there's no better way to do that than to start to execute SMS. It takes, leaders to be committed behind it all. Clearly that's a part of the process, but if you're going to do it, that's the area to start with. Risk management is kind of the catalyst for change, and it's the accelerator of the whole thing.
Jim, you hit on something, and I want to unpack this a little bit. You mentioned an environment to learn, sharing information and such like that. Steve Allen has taught me so much over the years about SMS and PSMS. And the one thing he says, it's a journey, it's not a destination. And Steve is a huge proponent of committees, task force, items like that, where people can share And you hit on it too. You have 30 years of knowledge up on that noggin of yours. I don't have as much. I have a little over 2 decades, but still there's going to get a time where we hopefully can retire at some point down the road here, right? And we have to think about those other, actually 2 generations that are right behind us. And how do we get that information? What are some of those platforms that you see are beneficial that we could get people to recommend to people to get engaged and involved with?
Yeah. Clearly today, the AGA, for example, there's, great sharing forums, things like the peer review program. You get like the API and some of the avenues that they have to come in and do, an evaluation. And those are one way to certainly share about it. I got to be involved in sort of executive level conversations around incidents and things that would occur. And those are all great, but once again, we start to think about, like you talked about, the number of people that are transitioning in the business. And,
yeah.
My 30 years, your couple of decades, 5 years, 10 years from now, we're not going to be sitting there having these kinds of conversations. So somebody else behind us is. How do you start to accelerate, their understanding and their learning? And I mean, you go back in time, and it's interesting when I talk about 1173, a lot of times I start with 1965, because people don't remember what the driver was behind pipeline safety code and how it came to be. And there's an interesting incident in, Natchitoches, Louisiana, that talks about pipeline exploding and stress corrosion cracking and all these other things that we see in integrity management. And, how do you get from that to where we are today? And part of that is, discussing the history along the way, San Bruno and Bellingham and all these incidents that created change. So, there's forums out there that exist, whether it's going to an AGA conference or, things like what you guys do, where you might bring your clients in, or we might bring our clients in. But I'm not sure that we're having a conversation with all of the levels of the organization, maybe that can be. Certainly executives talk about it, and then they try to bring that back to the workforce. But how do you, do we ever get an operator to talk to an operator? That's a piece that is sort of fascinating that, I'm not sure that we've scratched the surface on that yet. And maybe that's where we start to get to sort of that next level. Let's not talk about incidents. Let's talk about risk, the things we're doing to improve it. Let's make sure that we're, getting the feedback from those people that really understand how to do the work.
Yeah, and I've seen that. Just let me pop in real quick, James. Jim and I were at AGA New Orleans a couple months ago for committee and board meetings and all that. We ran into each other, and those days were very intensive, sitting in committees where a lot of people are sharing. And in my committee, which is supplemental gas, LNG, CNG, and how we can use it on the grids, that's my pass. It was just amazing to sit in there with 40 some people in just that committee alone. And all the sharing, and the walls went down, and we had operators from all over the United States that were involved in that. And we were really just trying to share best practices, safety tips, safety items, ways to do things more efficiently. And it's really wonderful to see. And again, that was 40. And we can imagine how many people are in our utility space right now throughout the United States, just to get that out. But good point. I didn't mean to jump.
Yeah, no. I was just going to mention, think about what we just saw at the Louisiana Gas Association Pipeline Safety Conference, right?
Yeah.
It was very similar to what Jim is describing, and just people coming together and talking about things. And there were inspectors and regulators and all kinds of folks in the room, but it was very refreshing. And it wasn't just Louisiana. Like, we had 6, 7 states at least, like, with authority there. And I think that was refreshing to see.
Yeah, that was your first time there.
Yeah, there were a lot of great groups out there doing a lot of awesome work.
Yeah, there really are.
I was following you guys on LinkedIn and seeing all the posts, and I kept thinking to myself, LGA must do a great conference. It sort of made me want to be there with all the things that were going on. But I think it's interesting that one of the challenges is trying to understand, like, okay, what's the best practice around this? And how do you start to have that conversation so you can recognize it? I remember years ago, I went to an AGA best practice event, and it was really, really good. And we were talking around, I think, emergency response, and, but you're at the whim of whoever happens to be there in the middle of that conversation, so there might be 4 or 5 operators, and you're talking about the best practice among them, not the best practice in the industry. And so having that bigger conversation with 40 people, or, that part of it, I think, is where the evolution of SMS and the evolution as an industry starts to really make change so that we never have to go to the point of putting new regulations in place. Not as a result of an incident.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think regulators, last week, James and I, being at LG, spent a lot of times with PHMSA as well as regulators from a lot of the Gulf states were there. And when the regulators hear a lot of the chatter and talk about initiatives that people are doing in the industry, I think it does energize them, because they want to support that. They want to support those dialogues. They want to support that process. And instead of being the person that says, here, you shall or you should do this, rather they're like, that's a great idea. When I heard that, I was like, that gets me excited, because they're saying, yes, keep going, folks, keep going. And PSMS, again, for me, I'll go back to Steve Allen. It never ends. There's never a final. You don't get to the point where you say, okay, I completed it, we're done. It's everlasting. And that's an exciting thing, that you always want to reassess and look at it and how you can keep evolving and doing better. So,
yeah, it's funny because Steve Allen and I, we started that conversation back in 2015. And part of it was not really knowing what we were doing, and it was, let's figure it out as we go collectively between his staff, our team, and we sort of collectively worked together on it. And there was a point in time where we did a continuous improvement event, and it was around 811, and the ability to call. And in that event, we had Steve, or in one of his team members, we had excavators, we had the folks from Indiana 811, we had our team, we had our locators. I mean, it was a really cool event. It sort of demonstrated what's possible in this, if you really start to engage all your stakeholders in the right way. And it was and at the end of the day, like, we didn't necessarily walk away with all the action. Indiana 811 had some, the excavators had some, Steve had some, we all had something to do. So it was, it was pretty powerful, I guess, in the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. Okay, Jim, I've been waiting days to ask this question.
I knew you were going to do this. Yeah.
What?
I knew you were going to do this. Yeah.
Oh, I've been waiting with a ready, bated breath. Anyways, you have a top 100 movie list. Okay, I want to dive into Jim more on the personal side, because there's some interesting facts that have come about that I've just learned. You have a top 100 movie list that's ongoing. Is that correct?
It is. I'm the dork who makes an Excel spreadsheet, 15.
Oh, you do not. You do?
Oh, yeah. I have an Excel spreadsheet.
And he has an SMS program for it. It sounds like
that. It's the quality control process around, the movie industry.
QMS. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have this Excel spreadsheet that every year I get to January, I copy the prior years over. I go through this exercise of validating that do I still like these movies or not, and then I update the list. And so it's funny. I started this when my son was born, who's now 23 years old.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Around that time.
It's a while.
Oh yeah, it's been a while. I think my list actually goes back 15 years, but AFI came out with their top 100 movie list of all time.
Yeah.
Citizen Kane was number one. I forget what was number two. Just go down the list of all these like epic movies. And so I thought to myself, I've never watched these movies. So I rented Citizen Kane. I watched it. I was like, eh. And I rented the next one. I was like, eh. And I finally got to Lawrence of Arabia. And I can see why people, think it's one of the top 100 movies, but I was like, eh. So I got a 6-pack. I sat down on a Friday night, 3 o'clock in the morning. I finally had myself a list hammered out, and I've been maintaining it ever since.
So where does Point Break land on your list?
It doesn't even make the honorable mention.
Does Pulp Fiction make it?
No, and you know what? That's one of those. So this is the best part about having the list, because people then start to like go, wait a minute,
influence it. Yeah.
Should not be on there. And that's actually that's a rather common one that comes up when I talk to people. I just never got into Tarantino.
It's understood. All right, so we got to know though. We got to know, right? Like what's in the top 5 in Jim Francis. And by the way, this is like my love language. You're my kind of nerd, Jim Francis. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, I'll send you my list when it's all said and done. Of course, I was, a child of the 1980s, so it's like a lot of movies on there from that era. But the number 1 movie of all time is Gladiator.
Oh, okay. With Russell Crowe. That one?
Oh, yep, that's the one. Yep. I watched that with my father. My dad was never a guy that ever watched movies, and I sat and watched it with him one night, and he looked at me after one. He goes, "That was an awesome movie."
Yeah.
Okay, I have to play this game for just a second. My wife's favorite movie is Forrest Gump, and surely that make it somewhere?
Oh yeah. Forrest Gump's up in the top 10. That's actually my wife's favorite movie. So number 2 is Die Hard.
Oh,
Number 3 is Hoosiers. Number 4 is
what a homer.
I grew up in Michigan. I didn't grow up in Indiana, so
Okay.
yeah, I watched it when I was living in Ohio. But and number 4 is Shawshank Redemption, and number 5 is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
No, that's good. That's solid.
a couple of those are my favorites.
I
Absolutely.
love it.
Being
I love
product
it.
of the 80s, James, some of us are a product of the 80s.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah. He wasn't even born then. I'm just kidding.
That's not true. I was born in '79, actually.
Oh, so you can claim 70s.
Really an
a little bit.
'80s baby. I mean, really. And then there's another cool fact about Jim that I want to bring up too, and that's that you recently got into painting, from what I understand. And we didn't really get to talk about this in the pre-show, but what are you painting and what got you into it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what got me into it, I'll start there. My youngest son has some disabilities. And, over the years, you try to figure out what kind of therapies might work, for him. And we got turned on to art therapy. And he's 19 years old today. So he probably started when he was like 8 or 9 years old. And the art therapist taught this process called meme therapy. And, they work him through a lot of visual, things and try to get their brain stimulated. And then they paint. And it's unbelievable what they paint. I unfortunately I don't have one of his pictures here to show you. I wish I had gotten one, but anyway, so she moved to Florida, and then we moved to Texas. And it's like I don't have an art therapist any longer, and so I thought to myself, I'll try to be the art therapist. And then it just caused me then to think, maybe I should try to paint. I mean, I'm painting with him all the time, and maybe I can try it. So I did a painting, and I painted a barn with a big sunflower in front of it. And I went, that's not half bad. But then you start to apply your engineering skills and go, it's not to scale. There's all kinds of other things you want to do with it. And then I painted the next barn, and it turned out awesome. It's the best painting I've done. And ever since then, so I've probably done 40 or 50 paintings since then.
Wow.
Do you sell them on eBay? Can I buy one? I mean,
yeah, I've heard that. People have said, hey, if you try, you might, you can get people to buy this.
Have you done one of us yet? Like on the podcast? I'm just wondering.
No, not yet, but I could.
Okay. It's just
I've only done one. Faces aren't my thing. I'm kind of in the landscape.
Same.
Yeah.
you should post some of those sometime.
Hold on. I think he has one.
I got two paintings.
Let's see them.
Now.
Yeah.
I'll show you my first one, which is a barn. The barns are kind of my thing.
Look at that. He said it's not to scale.
Is that the one that you were?
Oh, this is the one you fixed.
This is one's to scale. It's just not. It's not my favorite one. I've got others that I think are a lot better.
That's
But
beautiful.
I paint acrylics, and I do some watercolors. And then this one, you'll see I'm not good at faces, but
Oh, yeah, little nativity scene.
Love it.
so
That's great.
I go online, I find pictures, and I try to replicate them.
Well, I tell you what, though, for your experience with your family and son doing that, as well as the last couple of years of COVID, I know a lot of us have struggled with releases and trying to get our energy something other than, honestly, working 12, 14 hours a day in front of the screen for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
We're now getting back out. We're now doing things, but I bet that was very beneficial for you, not just for your son over the many years, but for you personally, Jim, over the last 2 years. And it's fun to see that.
Yeah, it's been a good release for me. It's funny because my wife always says, I'm jealous. I don't have that release. I don't have that thing. And so I just bought her a keyboard so she can, play her piano.
That's
Love it.
good.
I was about to say, my wife would say, you need to go paint.
She would put you away, James, say, yeah.
You need a little bit. Well, Jim, we're wrapping up here, but we ask everybody, or we've been asking everybody one question. One of our things we try to do here with the show is give it all away. We can't take it with us when we leave here. And so anything we can teach folks, whether it be leadership or ideas or concepts or, things about our industry, whatever it is that Jim Francis would want to give all away, what would that be?
Yeah, I love the question because it sort of prompted my my thinking around what that would be. And many years ago, my mother gave me a book, and I'm not really an avid reader. So she gave me a book called Falling Upward. And, the premise behind the book is we sort of live two stages of life. In the first, 40 years of your life, it's pretty self-absorbed. And, you're trying to figure out who you're going to be and what you're going to be. And you're worried about your job, and you're worried about making money, and you're worried about whatever, status and all the other stuff. And then at some point, there's this sort of, flip of the switch, and you start to realize, I can't take it with me. And I love the fact you talked about that, because it's like you can't take it with you. So, it's really guided me really over the last, 7-8 years, really since I finished the book. And I actually started reading the book, and for whatever reason, it was like too deep for me. And I put it down. And then like 3 years later, I picked it back up and I finished it, and then just read through like I was reading a comic book. It was simple. And, there was a message that needed to be, had to me at that time. And so I think about that in terms of my work and my personal life. It's like, what can I give back to others? And, that's part of the reason why I consult SMS. It's like, there's stuff that I can't take with me, and somebody else needs to know it. And we got to be able to help each other. And so, we've all got that, in us. You guys are doing that. It's what you do as part of the show, is try to give back to others. And there's a lot of people out there like that. And I love that. Just make sure you realize that, there's value that we all have to give to somebody else. So,
Amen. It definitely resonates strong with myself and James. And I tell you that mindset, Jim, that you have, again, resonates with so many in the industry where they want to do that, and they are doing that, and it is for the betterment of the whole industry. So it's wonderful to see, wonderful to hear. So yeah, exactly. Well, I don't want to end, guys. I mean, I could keep going and going, but I think we're at our end. Jim, Francis, any last minute things you want to say? Anything to wrap up with?
Yeah, I just thank you guys for letting me have the opportunity to be on the show. And, maybe if you ever want to make it a trio someday, we can go Jim, James, and Jimmy. I don't know. You guys are doing an awesome
job. Yeah, this is over our Jim quota, I think.
I once had a college class that had 10 people in it, and 5 of them were named Jim, and too many Jims was not a good thing.
Yeah, like even before the show, James says, "Hey, Jim," and you and I both looked. We're like, "Is he talking to you or is he talking to me?"
In one of my middle school classes, I had a guy named James Cross.
Oh, no kidding.
I mean, seriously, same name. It was the most confusing thing on earth.
Yeah, I bet.
That's all we got, folks. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
guys. It's an absolute pleasure. I'd like to reserve maybe a repeat guest, maybe couple them up with a Steve Allen down the road or something like that, really nerd out on SMS stuff and get into it. So if you're willing, Jim, we'll keep you on the retainer. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me. Will we see you guys at the AGA in the fall?
I'll be there. Yes, absolutely. Anaheim, California. Yep, absolutely. Until next week on Coffee with Jim and James, we appreciate you tuning in. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate you joining us. Thanks, James, for all you do.
Bye-bye.